The boat showed up overnight. I walked out that morning with a mug of burnt coffee, ready to check on the dock behind my house, and there it was, an ugly, sun-bleached pontoon boat tied up like it had always belonged there. The kicker: it wasn't mine. I'm Kellan Rooker. I've lived in this lakeside neighborhood in Georgia for 8 years, bought the house fair and square, dock included. I built that dock with my own hands, and I sure as hell didn't build it for someone else's floating trash heap. I stood there staring at it, stunned. It had mildew stains on the sides, a busted radio antenna, and a sticker that said "Property of HOA, do not remove." That last part made my jaw lock. I already knew who was behind it. There's only one person in our neighborhood petty enough to mark something that obnoxiously Janelle Danvers. HOA president. 5'5" of pure control freak energy, with a voice like an emergency siren and a talent for making every neighbor want to fake their own death to avoid her. She lived 3 houses down, and ever since she got elected last year, she'd been on a power trip. First it was mailbox heights, then it was lawn color. She even tried to ban wind chimes, said they disrupted the auditory harmony of the cul-de-sac. Now it was my dock. I didn't waste time. I walked straight to her house and rang the bell. She answered wearing a wide-brimmed sun hat and a neon pink visor underneath. "Oh, Kellan," she said, drawing my name out like it hurt her gums. "So glad you came by. Isn't the boat lovely? HOA needed a temporary mooring spot while we renovate the marina." "On my dock?" I asked. "Without asking, it's not technically your dock," she said, waving her hand. "It's within the HOA's easement zone, which gives us shared access." "No, it's not," I said. "It's on my deed. I've got the land survey and title to prove it." She gave a tight, fake laugh. "We'll have to review the documents at the next board meeting. Meanwhile, it stays. HOA voted unanimously." "Voted when? Who? I'm a homeowner. I didn't vote." "Oh, Kellan," she said sweetly, "you missed the special session. We posted the notice on the community board by the tennis court. Maybe you should stay more involved." That was her favorite move, burying votes in obscure notices, usually posted a day before the meeting in places no one checks. Then she'd claim unanimous approval. I wasn't going to argue with her on her front lawn. I turned and walked back home, fuming. My blood was boiling. That boat was going to leak oil all over my dock, attract raccoons, and block me from launching my own kayak. I called a local towing company to see if they'd remove a boat from private property. They said they could, but only with proof of ownership or permission from the property owner. "Good," I said. "I've got both." I pulled out my deed, printed photos of the dock from when I built it, and even grabbed a copy of the HOA bylaws. And then I waited. 3 days passed. The eyesore stayed. Janelle even added a chain to its bow, like she was daring me to move it. That was the last straw, so I made a call. Not to the towing company, to a guy I knew from high school, Omar. He runs a landscaping and hauling business now, does a lot of weird jobs. I asked him one question. "You still got that flatbed trailer?" "When do you need it?" he asked. "Tomorrow night," I said. "And bring straps." Omar showed up just after sunset, rolling in with his battered F-350 and a long, steel-deck flatbed trailer clinking behind him. The kind of rig that made neighbors twitch their curtains. We didn't talk much. I handed him the paperwork copies of the land survey, dock registration, and HOA bylaws, and he flipped through them in the cab while I stood watch outside. "You weren't kidding," he said as he climbed out. "This is airtight. You want it gone, it's gone." "No damage," I said. "Just relocate it." He nodded once, then went to work like he'd done this 100 times. I clipped the dock lights off and stood in the shadows while he unhooked the chains, winched the boat up with the quiet hum of an electric motor, and secured it with thick nylon straps. "Where to?" he asked as he tightened the last one. I looked across the lake, past the cluster of townhomes on the hill, to the backyard with the faux Grecian statues and solar-powered flamingos. "Her place," I said. "Back lawn just inside the fence." "Don't scuff the petunias." He gave a low chuckle and pulled away slow, tires crunching softly over gravel. I followed in my truck, no lights, engine low. We looped around the lake, took the back road past the pickleball courts, and turned onto Millstone Drive. Janelle's house was dark, but I knew she was home. Her Tesla was parked crooked in the driveway like it had been yanked in mid-tantrum. Omar backed the rig up to her privacy fence with surgical precision. I hopped out, unlatched the gate, and swung it open like I was revealing the final scene of a magic trick. The grass was manicured within a quarter-inch of its life, but the center was wide open, perfect for parking something she couldn't ignore. Omar lowered the trailer deck and eased the boat down with barely a sound. It settled under her porch floodlight like it had always belonged there. I left the sticker intact. We were gone in under 10 minutes. The next morning, it detonated. The neighborhood group thread lit up with vague complaints, unauthorized deliveries, property values. Someone even said terroristic yard art. I didn't respond. I was already on my front porch watching the show. Janelle came storming down the street in wedge heels and a silk robe, hair pulled into a knot so tight it looked like it hurt. She didn't knock. She pounded. "You have exactly 5 minutes to explain what you've done," she snapped, her voice pitched just above sanity. I opened the door halfway. "Morning, you think this is funny?" Her eyes were wild. "That boat is on my lawn." "That boat," I said calmly, "was illegally placed on my private dock. I removed it. You can't just dump it in my yard like some kind of lawn ornament." "I didn't dump it," I said. "I returned it." "Clearly labeled property of HOA. You're the HOA president. Seems like it's your responsibility." She pushed past me into the foyer, uninvited. "You're going to jail for this." "For what?" I asked, following her. "Returning stolen property." "It wasn't stolen," she hissed. "It was requisitioned." "You don't have that authority," I said. "You never did. I checked the bylaws. There's no temporary mooring clause, no emergency easement override. You fabricated a vote that never happened and used HOA resources to violate private property." Her face twitched, just for a second. "I have the documents," I continued. "And I know you used HOA funds to rent that boat, which, by the way, has an expired registration and no insurance. If someone had gotten hurt," she backed up a step. "I've already filed a complaint with the county," I added, "and the Georgia Secretary of State's office. The HOA operates as a nonprofit corporation. That means you're subject to both civil and criminal liability for misuse of funds and fraudulent governance." "You wouldn't dare." I held up my phone. "I already submitted the paperwork. And I've got Omar's invoices and video of the whole removal in case you try to spin this." Her jaw clenched so tight I could hear her teeth grind. "You want me to call the sheriff?" I said. "Because I will." I'd love to explain how the HOA president illegally seized private property and dumped an unregistered vessel on someone's dock without permission. She didn't respond, just turned and walked out, muttering something under her breath. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. 2 days later, I came home from work to find a bright orange citation taped to my garage. "Unauthorized structure modification," it said. "Violation of dock conformity standards. Fine, $1,000. Now it was war. I spent that night reviewing every HOA action taken in the last 6 months. I pulled records from the county clerk's office, cross-checked them against the HOA's own newsletters, and found something interesting. Janelle had been signing expenditure approvals solo. No co-signatures, no board votes. That alone was a violation of the HOA's own charter, but it got worse. She'd spent over $20,000 in the past 3 months on community improvements that no one could identify. Half the funds were paid to a shell company registered under her cousin's name. The address: a P.O. box in Alabama. The next morning, I called a friend, Maya, who works as an auditor for the state's nonprofit oversight division. I sent her everything. She called me back within the hour. "This is bad," she said. "If even half of this is real, it's embezzlement. And mail fraud, since she's using interstate addresses. I'm flagging it for investigation." Within 3 days, a state investigator showed up at Janelle's door. I watched through binoculars as she tried to talk her way out of it, hands flying like she was conducting an invisible orchestra. It didn't work. They took her laptop and several file boxes from her office. The citation on my garage disappeared the next morning. Then came the emergency HOA meeting. It was held in the clubhouse, and for the first time in a year, the room was packed. People who hadn't shown up for anything since the 4th of July cookout were there, and they were mad. I didn't have to say much. The investigator brought all the receipts literally. Copies of checks, bank transfers, forged minutes. It was brutal. People gasped. One guy in the back shouted, "I knew it." They voted her out unanimously. She tried to object, said the vote was invalid without notice. Someone else held up a printed copy of the bylaws. Special sessions can be called under Section 12 in cases of financial misconduct. You signed that into the charter yourself. She left halfway through, face pale and tight. I walked out last. The air was cool, the lake still. My dock was empty again, and Janelle's backyard still had the boat. The boat in Janelle's backyard had become a local landmark. Neighbors walked their dogs slower when they passed her house, lingering just long enough to get a good look. Some even snapped photos. You could hear whispers ripple across front lawns, people casually asking each other how long she planned to keep it there, pretending not to grin when they talked. But I wasn't paying attention to that anymore. I had other things on my plate. The state investigator had quietly contacted several homeowners, including me, asking for any HOA-related documents from the past year. I handed over everything: emails, newsletters, billing notices. Even the shady dock usage guidelines Janelle had sent out 2 months ago, which I now knew had no legal standing whatsoever. 2 weeks later, a subpoena was issued. I only found out because I answered the door one morning to a plainclothes investigator holding a badge and a clipboard. "Mr. Rooker," he said, "you're listed as a primary witness. We'll be presenting evidence to the grand jury next month. Just a heads up, you might be called to testify." I nodded. "Understood." He glanced past me toward the lake. "That your dock?" "Sure is." "I've read the report," he said, flipping through some notes. "That took some guts. Not enough people push back when HOAs cross the line." "She crossed about 20, I replied. "And she's not done." He raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" I stepped onto the porch and lowered my voice. "She's been visiting houses after dark, talking to people, trying to rally support. She wants back in." "Back in," he repeated. "She's telling folks this whole thing was a smear campaign. That the audit was manufactured by disgruntled residents who didn't like her leadership." He scribbled something in his notepad. "Anyone buying it?" "A few. Mostly the ones she gave committee positions to, but others are nervous. Nobody wants to be the next target." He gave me a card. "If she makes any threats or pressures anyone to tamper with witnesses or evidence, call me directly." I stuffed the card into my wallet and watched him leave. That night, I installed 2 new motion-activated cameras, one facing the dock and one facing my driveway. I wasn't interested in surprises. The following week, things escalated. It started when my neighbor Elise stopped by with a printout in his hand. "You need to see this," he said, stepping into my garage. The paper was a photocopy of a letter. Not HOA stationery, just plain white paper with a typed message. It read, "All residents who supported the illegal seizure of HOA property are subject to restitution under Section 14.1 of the Lakeview Civic Code. Fines will be levied accordingly. Failure to comply will result in civil action." It was unsigned, no letterhead, no proof of origin, but the implication was clear. "She left this in my mailbox," Ellie said. "No stamp, no envelope, just folded once and dropped in." I scanned the text. "It's a bluff. There is no Section 14.1. The Lakeview Civic Code doesn't even exist." Ellie looked uneasy. "Still, she's trying to intimidate people. She's trying to scare the ones not paying attention," I said. "We need to make sure everyone knows this is fake." Over the next 2 days, I printed and distributed a short memo. Just the facts. I cited state nonprofit laws, the HOA charter, and the investigation status. I didn't editorialize. I didn't point fingers. I just laid it out with a reminder that no fines could be levied without a legitimate board vote and proper documentation. The memo worked. Most people calmed down. A few even thanked me, but Janelle wasn't finished. 3 nights later, I woke up to the sound of tires on gravel. I looked out the upstairs window and saw a white sedan idling near my dock. No lights, no movement. I grabbed my flashlight, slipped on a jacket, and stepped outside. The car sped off the moment I hit the driveway. I reviewed the footage the next morning. The plate was partially obscured by mud, but I caught the last 3 characters. I called the investigator from earlier. When he showed up again, this time with a partner in a county cruiser, they took the footage and ran the plate. The result came 2 days later. The vehicle was registered to the same LLC Janelle had been funneling HOA funds into. That was the final straw. The county DA's office got involved. The charges being considered weren't just financial anymore. There was now a case for stalking, witness intimidation, and unauthorized surveillance. Apparently, I wasn't the only target. 2 other residents had reported similar incidents. One even found a GPS tracker under their car. The grand jury convened behind closed doors. 3 weeks passed. Then came the indictment. Janelle Danvers was formally charged with 6 counts: embezzlement, falsifying organizational records, misuse of nonprofit funds, criminal harassment, retaliatory threats against witnesses, and attempted fraud through bogus legal filings. She was arrested at home, ironically, while standing in her backyard next to the very boat she'd tried to use as a power move. The HOA board was dissolved temporarily by court order. A third-party administrator was brought in to manage community affairs until proper elections could be held under state supervision. The news broke fast. A local outlet ran a short segment on it, mostly dry legal language, but the headline was punchy. Lakeview HOA president indicted in fraud scheme. Residents say they warned her the boat was finally removed a few days later by the county. Hauled away on a flatbed, just like the first time, only this time it was seized as evidence. When I stepped out to watch it go, I saw something interesting. A pair of teens, maybe high school age, standing on the sidewalk across the street, taking selfies with it as it passed. Janelle's power trip had become a punchline. I didn't celebrate. Not exactly. But I did take a long walk down to the dock that evening, barefoot on the warm planks, and leaned back against the railing, just listening to the water. The quiet felt earned. Later that week, the interim administrator held a town hall meeting in the community center. This time, no one had to be begged to show up. People had questions about the future of the HOA, about safeguards, about whether dues would change. The administrator was calm, professional, and transparent. She explained that there would be a full forensic audit, and that every member of the community would receive a report before any new board was formed. Then she opened the floor. An older woman stood up and asked the question that had been hovering over everyone for weeks. What happens if someone like her runs again? The administrator didn't blink. The new bylaws will include disqualification clauses for anyone previously removed for cause, and future elections will be overseen by a neutral third party. There was a round of applause. Afterward, I was walking toward the parking lot when Lee caught up to me. "You know," he said, "a few of us were talking. You should run." I laughed. "Run what? I've got no patience for meetings." "Exactly, that's why we'd trust you." I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. That weekend, I got a letter. Not from the HOA, just a plain white envelope in my mailbox. Inside was a short, handwritten note. "You think you've won, but people forget, just wait." No signature, no return address, just that. I turned it over, read it again, then set it down on the kitchen counter. I didn't call the police. Not yet. Instead, I installed a third camera, just in case. The third camera caught something odd 2 nights later. Not another car or person, but a drone. Small, silent, hovering just above the tree line behind my backyard. It drifted slowly across the edge of my property, pausing over the dock, then arcing toward the houses across the lake before disappearing behind the neighbor's chimney. I reviewed the footage 3 times before forwarding it to the investigator's email. 30 minutes later, my phone rang. "Could be related, could be a copycat," he said. "We'll dig into any drone registrations in the area. Meanwhile, don't engage." "I wasn't planning to," I said. "But if it comes back, I'm not letting it fly off with another round of photos." He paused. "If you can safely disable it without violating airspace laws, go ahead. Just don't cause a fireball." That weekend, the interim HOA administrator distributed the preliminary audit results. Not by email, not by door hanger, she called a community forum and handed out physical copies, 1 per household. The report was thicker than anyone expected. over 80 pages, outlining nearly 3 years of financial discrepancies, unapproved purchases, and falsified meeting minutes. A few of Janelle's former supporters walked out halfway through. The rest sat there in stunned silence as the administrator read off highlights: landscaping contracts awarded without bids, fabricated maintenance invoices, and a mysterious payment to a consulting firm that had never filed a tax return. But the worst part was buried near the end. Under a section labeled Asset Misuse and Potential Criminal Exposure, the audit included a sworn affidavit from a former HOA treasurer, someone who had resigned quietly last spring. The affidavit stated that during a closed session the year before, Janelle had ordered the deletion of line items from the official budget records and directed board members to submit blank authorization forms to expedite community improvements. The treasurer refused. Days later, her mailbox was smashed, and someone filed a noise complaint against her teenage son. She resigned the following week. That detail targeting someone's family hit the room like a dropped hammer. The administrator folded her notes and looked up. This is now beyond community governance. These documents have been forwarded to the state attorney general, and a formal request has been filed with the district court to freeze all HOA accounts pending seizure of assets related to the fraud. Someone in the back muttered, "Good," and no one disagreed. By Monday, patrol cars were making regular loops through the neighborhood, not just for show. The county prosecutor had issued a no-contact order against Janelle, forbidding her from approaching any residents who had testified or submitted evidence. I hadn't seen her since the arrest. But that changed fast. On Tuesday morning, I opened my front door to get the paper and found a business card wedged between the screen and the frame. Not from a lawyer or a contractor, but from a local news reporter. Written on the back in blue ink were the words, "Would love your comment." Especially about the boat, I called the number. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, curious. "We're doing a broader piece on HOA abuse of power," she said. "Yours isn't the only neighborhood affected, but your story has a centerpiece most don't a visual." I knew what she meant. The boat had become an image, a symbol. It was on social media now, photos tagged with captions like "Neighborhood Tyrant Gets Docked" and "When Karma Floats." "I'm not looking for attention," I said. "You're already getting it," she replied. "Wouldn't it be better to shape the story yourself?" I agreed to meet her on the dock at dusk. When she arrived, she didn't bring a camera crew, just a recorder, a notepad, and a quiet understanding of how to ask the right questions without making it feel like an interview. She asked about the first morning I saw the boat, then about the flatbed, then about the letter I'd received after the indictment. I told her everything except for names of neighbors who were still nervous about retaliation. When we finished, she looked out over the lake and said, "You know this isn't just about her, right? This is about a system that lets one person rewrite the rules with no oversight." "I know," I said, "but that system's getting rewritten now." The article ran 2 days later. Front of the lifestyle section, a black and white photo of the boat wedged on the edge of Janelle's lawn flamingos still standing awkwardly beside it. The headline read, "When the HOA president went too far, one resident fought back." The story went viral. Not nationally, this wasn't that kind of scandal, but local enough that nearby communities started digging into their own HOA boards. A neighborhood 2 miles over launched an emergency vote to audit their treasurer. Another one hired a lawyer to review recent fines. I started getting emails on the anonymous HOA tip line the administrator had set up. Not complaints, thank yous, from people I'd never met. One was from a woman who lived in another county, who said her HOA had tried to evict her over a wheelchair ramp. She said reading about what happened here gave her the courage to file an injunction. But the final chapter came from a courtroom. The trial opened 5 weeks later. Janelle pled not guilty to all charges. Her defense attorney argued she had been overzealous, not criminal, and that the board lacked the structural guidance necessary to prevent procedural errors. He tried to claim the boat incident was a misunderstood attempt at resource sharing. The prosecution, however, arrived loaded for bear. They brought bank statements, eyewitnesses, recordings from the audit hearings, and a forensic accountant who testified that over $34,000 had been siphoned into consulting fees with no deliverables. They even introduced the drone footage. Turns out it hadn't been hers, but it had been hired by someone linked to her cousin's real estate firm. The flight pattern matched the same route as the earlier surveillance incidents and was enough to establish an ongoing pattern of harassment. I was called to the stand on the third day. I kept my answers short, just the facts. I didn't try to make her look worse than she already did, but when the prosecutor asked why I'd gone to such lengths to remove the boat, I answered honestly. Because if I let it stay, it would have meant she could do whatever she wanted. And that wasn't her dock to take. The jury deliberated for less than a day. They found her guilty on 5 counts, including embezzlement, falsifying records, and intimidation of witnesses. The judge sentenced her to 2 years in county custody, with an additional 3 years of probation and a permanent ban from serving on any nonprofit board statewide. The reaction in the courtroom was quiet. No cheers, no gasps, just a shared exhale. A month later, we held a community election. This time, it was run by an independent facilitator. No secret ballots, no surprise meetings. Every candidate presented a written platform open to public questions. I didn't run, but I did submit a proposal for a new rule. Any board decision involving homeowner property required notarized consent from affected residents. It passed unanimously. I still walk to the dock most evenings. It's quiet again, peaceful, the way it used to be. A couple of kids fish off the edge now and then. Sometimes I wave. Sometimes I just watch the water. The dock's mine again, and not just in title, in truth.